And joining us now, Joel Rubin. You know him from Fox News. He comes on there often. He's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, serving under multiple administrations. He's now a current Democratic strategist, and he is with us now. Always good to get his perspective. Joel Rubin, thanks for being with us, man.
Hey, John, it's great to be with you. It's an honor.
Okay, listen, I know you're a baseball fan like me. What about those Nationals last night? Is that unbelievable or what?
Wow, that's a cathartic experience, isn't it? You shake off all those years of close, but not quite. Phenomenal. I was thinking about Bryce Harper a lot too throughout that.
Yeah, no, he's playing golf. I mean, all the money made. He's playing golf, but I tell you what, I listened to the game. I was on the road last night, so I had it on the radio the entire time, and the Nationals, like, everything was going wrong for them. I mean, they kept hitting balls at people. I mean, every time they hit a ball hard, it was caught. But baseball gods even out, and you get to the eighth inning. If you're a Dodger fan, you're at home. You've won 105 games. You did that so you can get elimination game at home. You're at home. You got a 2-run lead, and you bring in Clayton Kershaw, your Hall of Fame pitcher, to get 6 outs. And in 3 pitches, 2 homers, they tie it. And I knew right there. I said, Washington's gonna win this game. I guess Dave whatever his name is, the manager of LA is kicking himself right now that he didn't bring Kelly Jansen in for a 6-out save. But now they're out.
I got to say, it's they had no bullpen, or they had bullpen issues, the Dodgers, and even if they're a Hall of Fame pitcher, they're still human, and that arm isn't like made of steel. Things can go wrong. So a little payback finally from the gods. Hopefully, we'll get through this and we'll get to the series.
Well, I hope it's Astros Washington. Let's see how it plays out. We have to win tonight. I'm not going to even talk about the game, and I'm off tomorrow. I'm not in tomorrow, so win or lose. I would hate to do my show tomorrow if the Astros get beat 3 in a row by the Rays after winning 107 games. So I'm going to be in a bad mood tomorrow if they lose. Good thing I'm not doing my show and I took the day off. All right, Joe Rubin with us. Joe, I want to get first and foremost to the Syrian situation and the president's decision not to impede Erdogan's offensive in Syria. What say you?
Yeah, look, I'm with the president on the meta level of no endless wars, but I feel deep shame as an American to leave the Kurds out to dry like this and basically get slaughtered by Turkey. And I think it's a miscalculation by the president. He didn't have to do this in order to get to where he wants to go. And so now we're looking at a potential humanitarian disaster in northern Syria, the potential for ISIS fighters to get out of jail free, partnering with Assad and opening up some space to Iran. I mean, there are a lot of arguments one can make in either direction, but to me at the core, it's about America standing by the people who stood by us, and they, frankly, were our ground force. Remember, John, I'll just mention this one more thing. Remember, we don't want ground forces in the Middle East. You and I are on the same wavelength on that. And what we did was we actually enlisted the Kurds to be our ground force against ISIS. And they were effective. And now we're walking away from them. And that's, I think, a big mistake.
Well, what about the fact that the president has said that he's had numerous conversations with Turkish President Erdogan about the way this would go down and the threat that if it went down in a way that was not favorable to the Kurds, that the president would move in economically. How does that play into this?
I think he's making a fair point, but he doesn't have any. There's no teeth to it, and a lot of times these situations when you have multiple hostile forces staring at each other, and the Kurds and the Turks hate each other. Let's not paper it over. They do not want to have an easy peace, that's for sure. But we're in the middle, and they're actually both allies in a strange way, Turkey being a NATO ally. the challenge is, and it's not easy, is for what can we do to get something on paper, in agreement, rules of the road, clarity, and make sure that it's got teeth and penalties are clear, and that we have other allies in Europe and in the Middle East on board to make sure the penalties stick. So basically what President Trump did is he put himself out there alone, and he said, it's me, I'm going to destroy Turkey's economy. And there's like no connection between that and an actual program that makes sure that happens. So it's kind of toothless.
Joel, in your estimation, what is Erdogan's objective?
Oh, I think Erdogan is all about preventing the Kurdish community, and just I notice he's really in the weeds, but the Kurds as an ethnic population are a group that they're stateless, but they're spread across many states. Just to mention that there's like 30 million Kurds between Turkey and Syria and Iran and Iraq in this sort of space that they have no actual government and country. And so what Turkey is afraid of is, and he's had many fights over the years, and not just Erdogan, but Turkey overall, is the eastern part of their country where there are lots of Kurds becoming independent, and they have had terrorist attacks from Kurdish groups. So there's been a long-standing problem with the Kurds. And if the Kurds in northern Syria establish their own safe enclave and start functioning like a state, he would view that as a provocation where maybe the Kurds in his country would want to join. And so he's making a political calculation to try to stamp that out. I don't think it's going to work. It hasn't militarily, but that's the choice he's making. And for the U.S., the Kurds have been probably our most faithful ally in the Middle East amongst all despots and you name it types out there in the last 3 decades.
Joe, what is he going to do with the 2 million Syrian refugees in Turkey right now that he would like to resettle?
Boy, what a mess. I mean, Syria is a total failed state now. Half of the Syrian population, roughly 30 million, are either internally displaced or are refugees, like you described, a couple million in southern Turkey. And so we've been negotiating, President Trump and his team, to try to make northern Syria a kind of safe zone where the Syrian refugees can be shoved back in safely. But then Erdogan and the president spoke on Sunday night, and, God knows what happened, but the president decided he didn't want it anymore. And so that's deeply uncertain. It's quite possible that if Turkey really does do the maximum and clears out, in their view, the Kurds, they then shove those Syrian refugees back south into Syria because they're now partnering with the Assad government in this operation, according to reports. So there's a lot of humanitarian problems potentially in that space, and I'm not saying we have a magic wand. That's the thing, John. Like it's very, very frustrating, and it goes in both directions. And the neocon argument, like we can just invade and all of a sudden everything will be fixed, there'll be democracy and we're happy, is crazy. But at the same time, putting our hands over our eyes and saying, well, if we leave, everything will work out and it won't be a problem, is wrong too. And so we've right now put ourselves in a position where we don't have much credibility with people on the ground in the region. And if there's a humanitarian disaster there, we don't really have the tools to stop it.
You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network, your Godzilla of Truth in America. We're with Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under multiple administrations, both Republican and Democrat, and he's now a Democratic strategist. So, Joel, 2 things, and then I've got a couple questions here from our listeners. Number one, how does Assad fit into all this? I mean, there was a civil war. He won. Okay, I mean, it is what it is, right? He won. He stays in power. Eventually, he'll get the country back. Why is Assad going to sit around and let ISIS form caliphates again inside of his country?
There's a lot of uncertain and unclear alliances right now. And Assad, quite frankly, has been fighting multiple fronts for a number of years. He's been fighting the Kurds. He has been fighting democratic forces on the inside of Syria. ISIS was never his primary target. They were sort of separate, and in some ways he actually had unleashed ISIS and allowed them to kind of coalesce in the north of Syria. So we don't know what his plans are for ISIS. Turkey, at the same time, in the Obama administration, it was a failure, right? Like, Turkey essentially allowed ISIS fighters to come from Europe through Turkey into northern Iraq and Syria. And Turkey has given fits to many administrations. Donald Trump is not the first. George Bush, Barack Obama, you name it. Difficult relationship. And so we don't know. We do know there are a couple thousand ISIS fighters who are hardened fighters in a prison that the Kurds were guarding. We don't know what Turkey will do with them. Will they kill them? Will they allow them to go back to Europe and create a mess over there? Assad's goal, as you said, and he's clearly got in the driver's seat, is to have control over all his territory. But he may very well make trades with Turkey. And the ISIS fighters have never, I won't say never, but they've not been the number one goal of Assad. Assad's been going after more democratic type of forces inside Syria. That's who he really tried to block, because he is an autocrat, and he has that was his primary objective, to go after those forces. The ISIS guys kind of operated in their own space.
So, Joe, what is the incentive for the Kurds to release ISIS fighters who they've captured? I mean, what is the incentive for them to just release them into the streets, like the neocons are claiming is going to happen? What is the incentive of that? Like, why would they do that?
You're asking the right question. It's not there's no incentive, right? Like, it's not like they want them out. ISIS fighters and Kurdish fighters are sworn enemies, and letting them loose in Kurdistan or in the Kurdish areas is not a safe option for the Kurds. And maybe that's what President Trump is calculating on. Hope is not a strategy, as we like to say in both directions. But I think, frankly, it may come down to capacity. And at a certain point, if Turkey really moves on Kurdish areas, Kurdish fighters are going to have to decide where are they going to put their forces. Are they going to do it to take on Turkey and protect their families? Or are they going to hold on to ISIS fighters in prisons instead and potentially lose territory? Who are they going to fight? And I think that's the danger here that we're looking at. And these are choices that I frankly wish we didn't have to force them to make. And so the result is we just don't know. And they just may very well go because capacity is not there to maintain pressure on the ISIS prison.
All right, we've got a couple of questions here, Joe, from our listeners. Let's get the first one. Jeremy in Chesapeake says, ask Joe, okay, there's a bunch of humanitarian issues. Why is it the United States is the one that has to deal with this? Where is the United Nations?
It's a totally appropriate question, and it's the right question. And the good news on that, I hate to put it like this, but the good news is that the United Nations has for years been funding humanitarian assistance in all these refugee camps of the millions of Syrian refugees located in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Turkey, in all the peripheral countries. And we are contributing a major chunk of money to that. But these are international-run camps by the United Nations. So we do, as a country, provide about a quarter of the funding, or maybe about 20% of the funding to the United Nations, which in the big scheme of things is about $1 to $2 billion a year compared to $750 billion for our defense budget. So it's a lot of money, but it's not in proportion to what we spend on other items. But of this, you're right, we're putting money in. But we do that because we want these countries to try to have some stability and to not have genocide. We don't want Lebanon to fall into chaos further. Mm-hmm. We don't want Iraq to completely collapse or Jordan to disappear, because that is going to just continue to create more rot in the Middle East. So it's not our responsibility alone, but we definitely take on a larger role because that's historically been the way that we've exerted influence at the UN to do what we want.
All right, another question. Mike in Cape Charles in Virginia says, ask Joe, where are the other Arab countries? Saudi Arabia, UAE, Jordan?
They've been playing a nasty role. A lot of them have been playing a very nasty role, backing Assad to a certain extent, providing. I'll put in a couple of layers. One is providing space for refugees. So Jordan has a population of like 5 or 6 million. It has well over 1 million refugees. Imagine if the United States took in 15 million refugees, how we are proportionally. I don't think we like 10,000 here these days politically. It's very controversial, obviously. So those countries are taking in, the neighbors are taking in the refugees. A lot of fighting, though, has been backing Assad. The Saudis have been backing Assad quite a bit over the years. Iran was backing Assad, Russia backing Assad to maintain itself. A lot of these countries are playing a negative role, and I wish I had a single answer for how we fix all of that. But I think that the Syrian nightmare, which did start on Barack Obama's watch, the Syrian nightmare has been sort of you could call it like a mini world war or a regional war. It's essentially sucked in all the different players to a certain extent. And oftentimes when the Qataris and the Emiratis, UAE, they have grievances, or the Saudis, they will fund different sides, including jihadist terrorist organizations in Syria to do their bidding. It's a nasty mess.
All right, final question. Ivan in Woodbridge says, ask Joe. Joe, you got a lot of action here. Ivan says, ask Joe, short of troops on the ground, how can Trump help the Kurds?
Thank you. Short of troops on the ground, let's just see if we could turn the clock back, 72 hours or so. Our troops on the ground were not actually engaged in very inactive fighting, fortunately, but they were there. But they were sort of like, imagine the Special Forces guys with all of their significant Terminator equipment on their bodies and the ability to call in the planes through the walkie-talkie, right? Like, that's who we had. And it made them as powerful as a fighter jet. And so I think if we could get back to that space, that's helpful. That's critical militarily, not to be engaged, but to be providing enough of a buffer to prevent the worst from happening. But we really need to lean in on diplomacy. And John, this is what I want to make sure I communicate. American diplomacy has really atrophied right now. We're not using our best diplomats and our power and our pressure. Like, the president threatening economic war in Turkey is a great tool diplomatically to use, but he kind of did it in isolation through a tweet. Like, what if Mike Pompeo sat at the table across from Turkey and said, we're going to destroy your economy. Here's the president's statement about it. If you do anything, and here's where you sign, and here's what we start to iron out with them. That's what we need to do, because our troops should not be in the middle of this fight. But in the absence of a real diplomatic solution, and it's not a simple one, but in the absence of it, we have these commitments to these allies who have helped us in our time of need in killing ISIS fighters on the ground. And we need to make sure that we don't leave them worse off than when we came.
All right, Joe, I've got under a minute here, and I'm already in overtime, but I'm going to switch gears. I want you to put on your Democratic strategist hat.
Impeachment,
yes. And I've got 50 seconds, and I have to get out. Yeah. Should and will Nancy Pelosi have a vote on an impeachment hearing, yes or no, and when?
She should at her timetable. She should be negotiating with the White House to make sure that the White House recognizes that it actually has to respond to Congress and do an impeachment inquiry. Walk through that little opening that the White House tickled last night. I think that she will win that vote, and I think that it will go forward. But I think that the president seems to be playing dare right now and saying he'd rather be impeached than open up the books. And that's something that Democrats don't have a lot of patience for. So I think I'd be willing to support her in getting a vote on the floor if she can get something firm and committed out of the White House.
Okay, so you're in favor of her having a vote, a legitimate House vote on going forward with an impeachment hearing?
If we get clear commitments from the White House to provide witnesses in a real impeachment inquiry, absolutely.
Right,
but
which
if
also
we don't get
means
those commitments, can't do it.
Which also means the Republicans and ranking members of the various committees would have subpoena power. So it's not a one-way
if
street.
that's how they determine it, that they would have to negotiate the rules, absolutely. But the rules are negotiable. All of these are negotiable. The only thing in the Constitution makes it clear is that the House has the right to impeach, period. The rules are up to the people who are sitting in the House right now, along with the White House.
Yes, but we all believe in due process. I don't look. I talked to a couple congressmen yesterday. They think if Pelosi had the vote right now, she'd lose. That's why she isn't going to have it. Joel, I got to go. I'm getting hollered at by everybody. I got to roll. Thank you, Joe Rubin.